On Wednesday morning, February 16th, 1983, nothing about the Arlington 7-Eleven suggested history was about to pass through its glass doors. The store sat quiet under fluorescent lights that never turned off. Outside, the road was empty except for the occasional car drifting toward Washington, D.C. Inside, a coffee machine hissed softly and a lottery ticket rack stood untouched near the counter. Ethan Coleman had been working the night shift for just over 3 years. Same hours, same routine, same customers. At 2 in the morning, you learned patterns whether you wanted to or not. Truck drivers came in for coffee. Hospital staff grabbed cigarettes. Insomniacs wandered aimlessly. Some nights were so predictable Ethan could tell who was walking in just by the sound of the door. At 2:14 a.m., the door opened. The man didn't browse. He didn't look around. He walked straight to the lottery display. That alone wasn't unusual. What stood out was how deliberate he was. He leaned in, studying the tickets as if they mattered. He didn't grab randomly. He selected 3 specific scratch-off tickets, removed them carefully, and brought them to the counter. He didn't smile, didn't make conversation. He paid with exact change. Ethan rang up the sale, slid the receipt across, and watched as the man folded it neatly with the tickets and placed them inside his coat pocket. Then he left. The entire interaction lasted less than 2 minutes. Ethan didn't think much of it at first, but the next Wednesday, at almost the same time, the man returned. Same coat, same quiet focus, same 3 lottery tickets. Exact change. The Wednesday after that, again and again, 6 weeks in a row. Ethan never saw the man scratch the tickets. Never saw him check if he'd won. Never saw him return to cash anything in. That was the part that bothered him. People who play the lottery are chasing hope. They scratch tickets in their cars, at the counter, in the parking lot. They come back excited or disappointed. This man did none of that. He treated the tickets like paperwork. One night, after the man left, Ethan stepped outside during a lull and noticed something near the edge of the parking lot. 3 discarded lottery tickets from the same series. Out of curiosity, Ethan scratched them. All losers. Worthless cardboard. And yet, the man kept coming back every Wednesday like clockwork. Standing behind the counter under humming lights, Ethan felt something unfamiliar creep in. Not fear, not certainty, just a quiet, nagging sense that something didn't fit. And at 2 in the morning, with no one else around, that feeling was hard to ignore. By early March, Ethan stopped telling himself it was nothing. He didn't want it to be something. Working the night shift trained you to ignore small oddities. If you reacted to everything that fell off, you'd never sleep again. So Ethan did what most people do when something doesn't quite make sense. He waited. The man kept coming. Always Wednesdays. Always after 2. Never earlier than 2:10. Never later than 2:20. 3 lottery tickets. Same display rack. Same careful selection. Ethan began noticing details without trying to. The way the man stood slightly to one side, never blocking the aisle. The way his eyes flicked once toward the door before turning back to the tickets. The way he folded the receipt along the same crease every time. Still, none of that proved anything. Ethan didn't write anything down. Not yet. Instead, he tried to disprove his own suspicion. One night, the man arrived later than usual. 2:19 a.m. Ethan felt a small, irrational relief. The pattern had slipped, but the rest was identical. 3 tickets. Exact change. Gone. That relief didn't last. The following week, Ethan checked the lottery rack before the man arrived. He memorized the numbers. When the customer selected his tickets, Ethan saw it clearly. He wasn't just choosing a type of ticket. He was choosing position. After the man left, Ethan walked over to the rack and counted the empty slots. The missing tickets sat right next to each other, taken in sequence. That detail stayed with him long after the shift ended. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan paid closer attention. He noticed that when a new series of tickets was installed, the man adjusted immediately. No hesitation. No scanning. It was as if he already knew where to look. Still, Ethan resisted jumping to conclusions. Arlington was full of odd people at night. Government workers, contractors, people who live by routines more rigid than most. But there was one thing Ethan couldn't explain. The man never once checked a ticket. Not in the store. Not outside. Not the next week. Not ever. Lottery players chased outcomes. This man behaved as if the outcome didn't matter. One Wednesday, after the man left, Ethan stepped out to take out the trash. The air was cold, the parking lot empty. Near the dumpster, he spotted torn cardboard. Lottery tickets again. Same series. Same sequence. All losers. Ethan stood there longer than he needed to, staring at them in his gloved hand. He didn't feel clever. He didn't feel excited. He felt uneasy, because this wasn't luck, and it wasn't habit. It was intention. Back inside, Ethan returned to the counter and stared at the lottery rack. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him. The store felt suddenly larger, emptier. For the first time, he allowed himself to think the thought he'd been pushing away. Someone wasn't buying lottery tickets. Someone was using them. And whatever they were being used for, Ethan had a feeling it had nothing to do with money. The first time the second man walked in, Ethan almost missed him. It was the same Wednesday. Same quiet stretch of the night. The first customer had already come and gone, right on schedule. 3 tickets. Exact change. 2 minutes. Routine. Ethan went back to restocking behind the counter, telling himself, again, that he was overthinking everything. Then, at 2:41 a.m., the door opened. This man was different. Younger. Maybe early 30s. Dark hair. Leather jacket instead of an overcoat. He moved faster, less deliberate, but his eyes went to the same place immediately. The lottery rack. Ethan felt his stomach tighten without knowing why. The man leaned in, scanning the display more actively, running a finger along the rows as if counting. He hesitated once, then pulled 3 tickets free. Ethan watched him walk to the counter. When he scanned the tickets, the numbers hit him like a jolt. Same series, same type, but not the same positions. They were further along the rack. Ethan kept his face neutral. Years of retail had trained him well. Inside, his mind was racing. The first man had taken 3 tickets in sequence. These were also in sequence, just not the same ones. There was a gap. Not random. Consistent. The second man paid with a $10 bill, took his change without looking at it, and left without scratching a single ticket. 2 men. Same night. Same series. Different positions. Ethan stood still for a moment after the door closed, the register drawer still open. That was the moment things stopped feeling strange and started feeling deliberate. This wasn't coincidence. And it wasn't 2 gamblers with similar taste. It was structure. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated. Always Wednesdays. First man just after 2. Second man, roughly 40 minutes later. They never crossed paths. Never overlapped. Never even came close. The tickets always came from the same series. Always in clean sequences. Always with the same numerical gap between them. Ethan finally started writing things down. Nothing obvious. Just times. Ticket positions. Small notes scribbled on scrap paper that looked like inventory reminders. He didn't tell anyone. Not his coworkers. Not his manager. Because saying it out loud made it sound insane. But the longer it continued, the harder it became to ignore what it looked like. 2 people using the same place to exchange information without ever meeting. No phones. No notes. No words. Just numbers. Timing. Routine. The store felt different now. Every Wednesday night, Ethan found himself watching the door more closely, listening more carefully, noting things he'd never cared about before. When the first man left, Ethan felt a strange tension in his chest. Not relief, but anticipation. Waiting. When the second man finally arrived, Ethan felt at ease. Like a completed sentence. Standing behind the counter, under lights that never dimmed, Ethan realized something unsettling. Whatever this was, it had been happening right in front of him for weeks. And the only reason it was still invisible was because no one had bothered to look closely enough. Ethan didn't report anything right away. That decision wasn't about fear. It was about doubt. He kept telling himself there had to be an explanation that didn't involve him being wrong, embarrassed, or worse, laughed at. He was a convenience store clerk noticing patterns in lottery tickets. That didn't sound like the beginning of anything serious. So he waited. But waiting didn't make it easier. Every Wednesday, the routine continued with mechanical precision. The first man, the second man, the gap, the tickets, the silence. And every Wednesday, Ethan felt the same tightening in his chest. He stopped enjoying the quiet parts of the shift. The store no longer felt empty at night. It felt watched. Not by the customers, but by the routine itself. One night, his manager, Rick, came in early to review inventory. Rick had been running that store for over a decade. He trusted systems, numbers, schedules. Ethan stood behind the counter, debating whether to say something. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. Finally, he asked a safer question. Do we ever move the lottery rack around? Rick barely looked up from his clipboard. State doesn't like us touching it. What? No reason, Ethan said quickly. Rick nodded and moved on. That answer didn't bring relief. It made things worse. If the rack couldn't be moved, then anyone who knew its layout could rely on it staying fixed. That night, after his shift, Ethan sat in his car longer than usual. The store's neon sign reflected faintly on the windshield. He stared at it, running through scenarios. If he was wrong, reporting this would make him look paranoid. If he was right, staying quiet meant he was already involved. The next Wednesday, Ethan noticed something new. The first man hesitated, just slightly. He stood at the rack longer than usual, eyes moving a bit more, as if double-checking. He still took 3 tickets, still paid with exact change, but the rhythm was off. When he left, Ethan felt a chill. Patterns only break when someone knows they're being watched. The second man arrived later than usual that night. 2:52 a.m. Instead of 40 minutes, nearly 50. That delay erased Ethan's remaining doubt. This wasn't random. It was adaptive. The following morning, Ethan didn't go home. He drove instead, past his apartment, past the grocery store, to a low, nondescript federal building he'd passed 100 times without noticing. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A flag. A security desk. Ethan told the receptionist he wasn't sure who he needed to speak to. I think I've seen something, he said, already feeling ridiculous. Within 20 minutes, he was sitting in a small room with 2 men who didn't smile much and didn't interrupt. They asked him to start at the beginning. As Ethan described the Wednesdays, the tickets, the timing, he expected skepticism. Instead, one of the men began taking notes. At the end, they didn't tell him what it meant. They told him something else. Go back to work, one of them said. Do everything exactly the same. Ethan nodded. As he left the building, one thought stayed with him. Whatever was happening in that 7-Eleven, it was no longer just something he was noticing. It was something he was now part of. Nothing about the store looked different the next Wednesday. That, Ethan learned, was the point. The men he'd spoken to never came inside. They never introduced themselves again. They didn't give him a phone number or a name to use. They just told him 2 things. Don't change your behavior, and don't acknowledge anything unusual. So Ethan went back to counting change, restocking shelves, and pretending the lottery rack meant nothing to him at all. At 2:13 a.m., the first man arrived. Same coat, same pace, same quiet focus. Ethan rang him up, hand steady, voice flat. The man didn't linger. 3 tickets. Exact change. Gone. From the outside, it looked exactly like every other Wednesday. What Ethan couldn't see, what he could only sense, was the attention. By the time the second man arrived, Ethan had noticed it in small ways. A car idling too long across the street. A reflection in the glass that hadn't been there before. A shape that disappeared when he looked twice. The second man took his tickets and left without hesitation. Ethan felt his pulse in his ears. After the door closed, nothing happened. No arrests. No confrontation. No sudden end. That night passed like all the others. The difference came later. 2 days after that shift, Ethan received a call at home. The voice on the line was calm and measured. They asked him to confirm times, sequences, whether anything had changed. Then they told him what the tickets were for. The lottery numbers weren't messages by themselves. They were references. Each ticket position corresponded to a page and line in a publicly available technical manual. The men weren't exchanging information directly. They were synchronizing what to read. The discarded tickets were a signal. Confirmation that the exchange was complete. Ethan hung up and sat in silence for a long time. He'd never met either man, never knew their names. But suddenly, The scale of what he'd been standing next to hit him. This wasn't a one-off. It was a system. Over the next month, the Wednesdays continued, but now with variation. Slight changes in timing. A different brand of ticket once. A longer pause at the rack. Each deviation was logged. Not by Ethan, by people he never saw. Then, one Wednesday, the first man didn't show up. Ethan waited. 2:10 passed. 2:20 passed. 2:30. The second man never came either. The lottery rack remained untouched all night. The following morning, Ethan learned why. An engineer working on a classified defense project had been arrested quietly at his home. No press. No announcement. The system had been shut down. Ethan went back to the store that night. He stocked shelves, mopped the floor, sold coffee to tired commuters. The rack was restocked with fresh tickets. Everything looked the same. But Ethan knew better now. He had watched something invisible operate in plain sight and disappear just as quietly. The arrest didn't change the store overnight. No police tape. No reporters. No curious onlookers lingering by the lottery rack. If Ethan hadn't been involved, he would never have known anything had happened at all. But the weeks that followed felt different in ways he couldn't explain. The Wednesdays stayed quiet. No familiar coats. No careful hands selecting tickets. No pauses that meant something more than boredom. The routine that had once unsettled him was gone, replaced by something almost worse: absence. A few days after the arrest, Ethan was asked to come back to the same federal building. This time, the room was larger. There were more people, folders on the table. They didn't share names or specifics, but they told him enough. The man who had been arrested wasn't a foreign agent himself. He was an American, educated, trusted, employed in a position that assumed loyalty without question. The two men at the store had never been his handlers. They were couriers, cutouts designed to never know what they were passing. Information had moved without ever moving. The damage assessment would take years. Ethan listened quietly, hands folded in his lap. The word damage stuck with him. It made everything feel heavier than it had in the moment. When the meeting ended, one of the men thanked him. Not formally, not ceremonially, just a brief acknowledgement, as if to say, "You noticed when most people wouldn't have." Ethan returned to work. Life didn't pause to mark what he'd been part of. Customers still complain about prices. The coffee machine still broke at the worst times. The fluorescent lights still hummed. But Ethan had changed. He found himself watching people more closely, not suspiciously, just attentively. He noticed habits, timing, the way routines revealed more than words ever did. One night, Rick mentioned that lottery ticket sales had dipped slightly. "Probably just a slow month," he said. Ethan nodded, knowing better. A few weeks later, the first man's coat appeared again. Not on him, on someone else. A regular customer wearing something similar, browsing casually, scratching tickets at the counter like everyone else. Ethan felt a brief surge of tension that quickly faded. The system wasn't there anymore. Whatever had passed through that store had moved on, dismantled piece by piece without spectacle. Months later, Ethan received a final call. No updates. No closure. Just confirmation that he wouldn't be needed again. When the line went dead, Ethan sat on his bed, phone in hand, feeling something close to loss. Not because he missed the danger, but because something extraordinary had brushed past his ordinary life and left no trace behind. Except in him. Years later, the Arlington 7-Eleven still opens at the same hour. The coffee machine has been replaced twice. The lottery rack has been redesigned. The parking lot has been repaved. Customers come and go without ever thinking about who stood there before them. Ethan doesn't work nights anymore. He took a daytime job, got married, moved a few miles away. The kind of life that doesn't come with stories people expect to hear. Every now and then, he drives past the store. Nothing about it draws attention. That's what makes it strange. He knows now how much can happen in places no one watches closely. How systems don't announce themselves. How information doesn't always travel in envelopes or briefcases or whispered conversations. Sometimes it moves through habits. Sometimes through routine. Sometimes through people who never realize they're part of something larger than themselves. Ethan never learned the full scope of what was lost, or saved. He never read his own role in a report. There was no citation for noticing patterns at 2 in the morning. And that's how it was meant to be. Intelligence work isn't built on dramatic moments. It's built on ordinary environments, staying ordinary long enough for someone to miss what's happening inside them. The men who came on Wednesdays disappeared into paperwork and silence. Their names never crossed Ethan's path again. But the lessons stayed. Whenever someone tells him that big secrets are impossible to hide, Ethan thinks of fluorescent lights, a quiet store, and 3 lottery tickets removed with care. He thinks about how easily we explain things away because they're familiar, and how dangerous familiarity can be. Because the most effective systems don't rely on brilliance or bravery. They rely on people not looking too closely, and on the rare person who finally does. If this story moved you, and you want to uncover more untold histories from the shadows of global conflicts, subscribe to Blood Litany for more cinematic, real-world intelligence narratives.